Hello everyone, this is Lulu Lee, and this is my senior final and inquiry project about obsession. In this project, I want to see what are the steps that lead up to obsession, at what point does interest become obsession, and how does a high level of interest in a concept differ from obsession. So I'm going to start off with a personal anecdote about something that I thought I was obsessed with in my childhood. When I was little, I really liked cats. I read all the books in the Lincoln Elementary School library about cats. I would take every opportunity to play with the cats around my neighborhood. And I guess this is all to compensate for the fact that my mom never let me have a cat. As I grew older, I realized that cats were not the most important things in the world, and even though I still liked cats, I would worry about them so much. In middle school, when I saw a cat, I would be reminded of how I used to be so sad that I couldn't have a pet cat, and I would pet it and feel just like a cat-sick kid again. Luckily for me, I got a cat in freshman year, and now I'm just your average pet owner. I have a fondness for cats, and I realized that my childhood cat mania stemmed from just being a little kid and not being able to take care of a pet of my own. As you watch this next clip, I want you to think about little Lulu and her interest in cats, and maybe your own love for your pet, and perhaps think about the term obsession and what it can mean in this example.
If it walks around and it breathes and has a heart, I want to take care of it.
As soon as you walk in the door, there's cats, like right there, like vultures. There's cats in cages, on cages, cats on shelves, cats in the kitchen. There are just cats everywhere.
As you can see, there is a clear distinction between obsession and interest, and it is this distinction that I would like to identify. If we use this as our model, we can see that a characteristic of an obsession is that the obsession builds off of itself. As this woman acquires a cat, she thinks of all the other cats she can take care of in addition to the ones she already has. On the other hand, you could say that after getting a cat of my own, my so-called obsession kind of died down. So here are some graphical representations of interest, with obsession being graph D. If we think of level of interest as a function of time, we can clearly see some differences in between these graphs. For example, in graphs A through C, we notice that eventually interest flatlines or just decreases or just kind of bounces around, while graph D just keeps on growing. Nikolai Gogol's novel Taras Bulba is about Taras Bulba, a Kazakh of Ukraine, whose defining attribute is his dedication to the Kazakh ideals and moral code. Throughout the novel, he is a symbol of true Slavic nationalism, as evidenced by his crazy devotion to all things Kazakh. He takes his son out to school to go experience battle, and when he sees that there are no wars to be fought, he arbitrarily makes one up because Kazakhs are supposed to fight, and that is just how he wants to raise his sons. We can say that his interest is his adherence to the Kazakh way, and that throughout his life it grew and grew before reaching a point where it really can't grow anymore. Even after he kills his own son for falling in love with a Polish girl and deserting the Kazakh way of life, we still don't see his devotion to those ideals increase. Because Taras Bulba was already at that level, was already willing and happy to see his sons die in war, and was in full control of his emotions, we can say that his interest did not, in fact, consume him and become an obsession. In this way, we see that Taras Bulba embodies graph A, which has a very rapid increase and then kind of a leveling off. This is just interest and not obsession. I will explain graph B with another analogy. You have a friend, and she's been bothering you with all her talk about this British boy band that you really don't care about. It isn't until you say, okay, maybe I'll listen to them, that you realize that maybe you're just a little interested as well. Maybe you listen to one thing, and What Makes You Beautiful a few times, watch their interviews on YouTube, maybe think about going to their concert when just over time you really aren't as obsessed with One Direction as you were when they first were really hyped up, and you see your interest die now. Now for graph C. Maybe you have a few pets at home, and you volunteered at the Humane Society all through high school. You really like animals, and you want to do nothing more than to take care of them. But instead of hoarding them in your house, you decide to go to pre-veterinary studies for college because you want to turn your love for animals into a career. Unlike Taras Bulba's flat line, your curve has its ups and downs because sometimes you're more into your studies, sometimes you have doubts, but it is just something you're interested in and not a one-track motivation for the rest of your life with the exclusion of all other activities. So, this curve kind of fits just basically people pursuing their careers, pursuing something they're very interested in, and it does not qualify as an obsession. Or maybe your career is your entire life and it just continues to grow and grow until it balloons out of control. In Herman Melville's novel Moby Dick, Captain Ahab would like nothing more than to kill the white whale that bit off his leg. Ahab has spent significantly more time on the ocean than on land, has only seen his wife once since he got married, and rules over his ship like a tyrant in order to kill the most whales and to find the whale that matters the most. While this can be your typical revenge plot, what makes Ahab's obsession so different is that he translates all the problems in the world to Moby Dick. The entire novel places Moby Dick as a symbol of all whales, and the concept of whale as a symbol of the universe, the unfathomable depths of the ocean, and the incomprehensible God that rules over the lives of men. Because Ahab puts all of this on one particular whale, and sees every single bad occurrence as a direct result of Moby Dick's existence, we see his rage and frustration build upon itself and grow at an incredible rate. Ahab actually acknowledges how he has let whaling consume his life, and how he has spent fruitless years chasing after one single enemy, but does not let this enlightenment cloud his singular purpose of hunting down Moby Dick. From Ahab's example, it is evident that obsession is involved in a self-increasing cycle, contains elements of inevitability, and damages those who stand in its way. This is reflected in graph D, where the curve just continues to grow and shows no signs of stopping or slowing down. Now that we've differentiated obsession from other varieties of interest, we can take a look at the steps by which obsession arises. So here's the graph of obsession and just a high level of interest. Blue is graph D and green is graph C, and we can identify some steps. The first step is exposure, which is when something first piques your interest. For example, in Daphne du Maurier's novel, Rebecca, this happens when the protagonist first finds out that the man she's in love with has a very popular dead wife. As interest builds, we go to step 2, which is critical interest, which is on graph C when the slope is the greatest. This is sort of when the protagonist of Rebecca, after being married for a while, starts to feel the presence and influence of the dead wife, Rebecca, everywhere she goes, and feels that Rebecca is hovering over her life. Step 3 is divergence, and we can associate this with the protagonist being unable to shake Rebecca's influence from her life. Instead of taking control of her life, she continues to define herself in comparison to Rebecca, and can't stop comparing herself and making an identity for herself. If you read this book for a sophomore year summer reading, you may remember that the protagonist does not actually have a name, and that her identity is directly linked to a woman whom she has never even seen. We've seen that obsession has an external aspect to it. This can be a higher calling, like you feel like you have to do something or you've been ordained to pursue something, as Ahab is, or it can be a sense of obligation. Even though we've established that Teraspolva is not obsessive, he feels obligated to raise his sons in the Cossack way. The last trait is uncontrollability, and this is where Teraspolva and Ahab diverge. Let me give you one final example. In Albert Camus' play Caligula, the Roman Emperor Caligula, who we've been warned is an artistic emperor, becomes devoted to the pursuit of something called the absolute after his sister dies. Since Camus is an existentialist writer, we must look at this play from an existentialist lens. Caligula becomes corrupted with the idea that he has to go against all moral codes, values, and boundaries of human decency, and he has to deny the existence or help of others in order to escape his fate. After a long period of murder and destruction, Caligula arranges for his own assassination. While it may appear that his behavior is obsessive, I think that at step 3 he did not diverge. As a truly existentialist character, Caligula took charge of his own fate and controlled his own life to the very end. When I started this project, I wanted to come up with a series of steps by which obsession arises, but I found that it is too complex to put into anything more than a vague sequence of events. After reading these books, I've come up with a tentative description of obsession. Obsession: an excessive, singular, uncontrollable interest in a concept at the expense of other interests, the individual or the individual surroundings, or when one is completely consumed by an interest in some subject. I found that I've learned a lot more about the topic of obsession through this inquiry project, and I hope that by watching this presentation you have acquired some more things to consider on this subject.